Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovitt. Today we're going to be looking at Session 16, Striving Toward Maturity, Part 2. You know, in order to mature, we need to correct our immature beliefs. Some of the beliefs are more cognitive in nature, you know, what we think, and some are without awareness. They're there, they're more felt beliefs. They're not necessarily on the front of our mind all the time, but when we get triggered, all of a sudden we're reacting, right? So that be implicit, embodied. It's when these immature beliefs are emotionally learned that we start to react because they carry that emotional weight with them. You know, what we want to do is emotionally relearn them. Now, in the last lesson, we looked at immature beliefs, and I wanted to put it out here again for us, so in your lesson you can find that. If you're watching this online and you don't have the lessons, you can email me at ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send you lesson 16. But if you weren't able to last time to look at these, then take the time now and check off the ones that you're struggling with. You know, one way to remain immature is to become locked in these childhood interpretations of traumatic events. These interpretations result in emotional beliefs that are really distortions of reality. I mean, we don't expect children to think that rational, do we? I mean, would you go ask a 2 or 3-year-old what political party you should follow, or what you should think about, house payments and your financial questions you have? Of course not. But yet we listen to a lot of these beliefs about ourselves, others, God, that came out of childhood, and they're distorted. And we have this dysfunctional, you might say, emotional reaction to them. They're lies sometimes, half-truths, negative, defeating beliefs, and we need to be able to correct them. Now, as you look at some of them, it's interesting if you can pay attention to the reaction that you have. What's happening in the body when you hear it? Not so much when you hear the belief, because you may identify with it, but when you start to disagree with it. When you say, maybe I shouldn't think this way, do you get a pause? Do you sort of get anxious? For example, I must please others to be liked. Now, I read that and I don't get much of an emotional reaction because I've been a people pleaser most of my life, right? And for me to think that, gee, I shouldn't have this, that's a negative thought. See, it felt right, but it's not. I don't have to please others all the time to be liked. You know, I need to do what I can, but pleasing, being a people pleaser, isn't the right thing. And so that gives me a check in my heart, which really tells me what? That I need to work on that. When you read, I'm a failure. Now maybe you're used to that. Maybe you're used to having that kind of thought about yourself. It's in your body, it's in the way you walk. To think I am not a failure just doesn't compute. Or sometimes it even sends a fear in us. Isn't that odd? Why would we be afraid? Because that's what we're used to. It's our norm. We've been taught to subjugate ourselves. And if we don't, then we could be in trouble. Now we know that's not true as an adult, but as a child, if you were felt to believe that you were a failure and you tried to be good and raise yourself above what maybe they thought you should be, what would happen? You'd get put down, right? To stay there. Could be siblings, could be people at school, could be parents, could be whatever, but you learned to believe that thing about yourself. How about other people's opinions are more important than mine? I mean, you see how you get a check if indeed you feel these things? And so we want to challenge these. We want to challenge the ones that we check off, and then we want to check ourselves for that negative fear that comes, that whatever reaction that makes us not want to go further and we want to push further. We want to start to believe the opposite. We want to believe the truth. We want to get over that, the feeling of, flight or fight or freeze that causes when we think that we should dare feel different than these. So it's really important. We're not going to change if we don't get in touch with some of these beliefs. So please take the time. Now, why these carry so much weight is because they've been emotionally believed. There's an emotion tied to them. It was an emotional learning. And it's hard to change that. That's why we've called the theory that we've created emotional relearning, because we need to emotionally relearn the truth. It's emotional because it triggers us. And there's 5 parts to an emotional learning. First, there's an emotional experience. And because it's emotional, then it has a what? An emotional feeling. And then with that emotional feeling causes that emotional belief, which then creates an emotional fear. Now let's unpack that a little bit. Look first at the emotional experience. I gave you a list here, and look at the different words. Look at, for example, at humiliated, or unappreciated, or abandoned. Have you ever had that experience where you were humiliated? Or maybe you were left unappreciated for something you did? Or maybe you were abandoned by everyone. That was an experience. It's an emotional experience. Why is it emotional? Because it's going to create the second part, and that is an emotional feeling. There's an emotional weight to it. And so what would be some of the feelings? Well, how about horrified, or maybe aggravated, or resentful, envious, insecure? Now, those are some of the feelings we have. And so sometimes the cue will be, well, what am I feeling, you see? We think of an experience, what was I feeling? What was the emotion? And we need to increase our emotional literacy. And we'll be doing that in a few weeks, where we'll start to learn some of the different words. That's why I give you choices here. And try to be accurate. Well, with that feeling then comes a belief. Now, it's not always a big cognitive, I'm fully aware of it. It's actually over a time that we start to verbalize it, and yet we don't verbalize it because to truly believe these things is very painful. That's why it creates such an emotional feeling. For example, look at emotional beliefs here. I don't deserve love. Now, seriously? Is that something we believe here? Probably not. But the question you want to ask is, do I feel it's true? See, it's an emotional belief. And there's been times when you probably have felt that maybe you didn't deserve love. Now, it's not true, but it feels true. I'm a terrible person. I'm broken. I'm insignificant. Try that one. How in the world? What would that really truly feel like, to feel so insignificant? And it isn't as if we're walking around all the time. It's when certain things happen and we get triggered. All of a sudden that walk of shame, that I'm nothing, I'm insignificant. And yet to really believe it, that's why I don't always say, I call it an emotional belief, because it is something that we do believe, but it's more a feeling belief. Do I feel this is true? For example, if I said, are you stupid? You would probably say no, and you'd have good reason to say that. You've been through education. You know a lot of things. You're not stupid. But I could say, have you ever felt stupid? Has anyone ever made you feel that way? And you might say, yeah, there's been times when I've been embarrassed, when I said something wrong and people mocked me. I felt stupid, you see. And what do you avoid? Do you avoid people literally believing that you're stupid because of incompetence? No. You avoid something that's going to humiliate you, where they may think you're stupid. Do you see the subtlety here? Really try to grasp this, okay? And what happens out of that then is an emotional fear. in emotional fear because of these felt beliefs. You know, you may feel, for example, you're not good at sports, and it may be true. But there's no consequence to that belief if no one's around to watch you play, right? But when you have to play in front of others, we start to feel, you know, thoughts like, well, what if they see me? Maybe they think I'm a loser or I'm a klutz. And see, all of a sudden there's an emotional fear tied in to this belief. You know, and so, you know, what are some of the fears that we have? Well, could be I'm rejected. I will be rejected. I'll be forsaken. I'll be seen as stupid. I'll be abandoned. I'll be left all alone. These are beliefs, and these are the fears that come out of that. So there's an emotional experience that creates this emotional feeling, which is tied into an emotional belief. And if that's believed, then it creates this emotional fear. Yet that isn't the end of it. Yes, we could feel I'll be rejected, I'll be forsaken. We don't want to feel that. It creates a fear in us. We don't truly want to be forsaken. I had a real fear of abandonment. But that wasn't the end of it. With that comes the alarm, and that's where the amygdala gets involved. That's where it gets escalated. That's why it seems so out of proportion sometimes. It's not necessarily from the beliefs themselves, the fear that the beliefs, it's from the consequences of what if that's true? What if I am rejected? What if I am forsaken? What if I am abandoned? What if I am seen as stupid? Well, then what? Well, that's where we have some of the beliefs. Now, the consequences of those kind of beliefs can be seemingly endless, but really, there are only so many catastrophic results that can happen. And it's that catastrophic belief that a child worries about. Child doesn't think in terms of death so much. They think in terms of non-being. They think in the consequences of being obliterated or wiped out. And so some of the different kinds of things that cause this fear in us, and it's irrational when you think of it. I'm going to die. I'm going to be wiped out. I'll be destroyed. I'll become a non-being. To truly, truly believe these things are terrifying. And that's why a lot of times when I teach people to overcome some of these things that are triggering them, first of all, I can almost guarantee that it's a false alarm. What they're believing isn't true. It's not true. And the fear they're believing is not going to happen. And so a lot of times I go, it's a false alarm based on faulty wiring or logic, right? And I'm not going to die. And that's become the war cry for many of the people I've worked with. I'm not going to die if they don't like me. I'm not going to die if I don't get an A+ on that test. You know, I'm not going to die if I'm not invited to the party. Now, I may feel that way, but that kind of takes that emotional alarm and diminishes it. And that's what we need to do. And so we grow into maturity by relearning what the truth is. We emotionally relearn. And we're going to go into this more and more as we go through the program, but I want to go through it a little bit here. There are different ways to emotionally relearn. You know, the truth, Jesus said, will set you free. And when we can learn the truth, and it's not just cognitive, it's emotional. When we emotionally relearn the truth, it can set us free. Now, there's different ways to emotionally relearn. There's a body reaction, a cognitive shift, and what I call an emotional aha. The body reaction is this emotional reaction to triggers, and by simply calming ourselves and not reacting as much as we react with a different kind of reaction, calmer and calmer and calmer, pretty soon our brain realizes that this isn't something to be emotional about. And so that exposure therapy kind of does that. Systematic desensitization, it works with, like, for example, a snake phobia, right? Where they take you and you get close to the, you see a picture of a snake, then you see a place where a snake is in the glass box there, and then you go up and you look from the top, then you touch it. Systematically you desensitize yourself, and the brain starts to learn that this doesn't have an emotional element to it. And that works with many things. We can start to emotionally relearn so that doesn't become a trigger. Another one is this cognitive, where we're learning that the lie we're believing and finding out what the truth is, to where it becomes an insight enough to be an emotional relearning. So that happens a lot of times when we think of why a traumatic accident happened. When I was trained in cognitive processing therapy, there was an example of a young man that was driving a car. He was at a stoplight, it went green, he paused for a moment, he went ahead, and out of nowhere a car came out of, I guess, a driveway, shot across the intersection, broadsided him, and his sister died. Well, he held the belief in his heart of hearts that he was at fault. And even though the policeman said there wasn't a thing he could do, he still held this. Well, in counseling, we saw that all of a sudden what he really finally was able to admit to himself was he had bent over a little bit to turn the radio station. Now, granted, did that distract him a little bit? Perhaps, but not enough. There's nothing he could have done. If he had been looking straight ahead, his head held high, he could not have avoided that accident. But that guilt was with him. And it didn't help that when it first started happening, the parents were so distraught. They said, why couldn't you have done better? Why did you drive that way? And, started to kind of like blame him. Now, later, I'm sure that was apologized about. I'm sure the parents really knew it wasn't his fault. But all that together caused this deep felt belief. And so he had to learn emotionally that it wasn't his fault. And psychology, sometimes this is called reframing. And there's different ones. There's a realistic appraisal, right? And that's what we did here. He had to have a realistic appraisal. He had to really relive that and see that there's nothing he could have done. And he needed a more accurate, factual, objective view. There's also the positive appraisal, where you're looking at, positive, rewarding, and beneficial aspects of the event or consequences. And in some cases, feeling, for example, the reason I teach what I do on anxiety and things like that is because as I've overcome some of these things, part of the positive parts is I can now help others. That it was okay that I went through that, where I can help others. And then there's the compassionate appraisal. Validating the emotional event is part of our human experience with a desire to alleviate it. And so there's different ways, and as we look at it, as we reframe it, sometimes we get then an emotional release from it, and it's an emotional relearning of the truth. And then finally, the one I find is the most effective is that emotional aha, where we actually go back into the memory and we bring with it our own mature self and perhaps someone else that loves us and it could have relevance in that situation. It may be a grandmother, may have been a sibling, or we may even ask God himself to come into the memory. And then what's the truth? We find out what would they think. And they share with us the truth, and we realize, and it's an aha moment. And the child in us, if you will, the one that's stuck in that arrested development, all of a sudden has this epiphany, this aha. That's the truth, and it's like pulling a thorn out of your arm, right? It's such a relief, and it's an emotional relearning. We'll be going into that a lot more in the future, but that's a little bit. You can reread it yourself, and I encourage you to read these notes. I encourage you to read them and really try to understand them and answer the questions at the discussion questions and meet with a group if you can. That's the way you'll really learn these things. So in emotional relearning, we have 3 phases. The first part is that emotional recognition, right? Where we start to recognize when we're getting triggered. And then we want to learn to regulate it. And there's a lot of different ways we can regulate it. And I mentioned some of them in the chapter there. And then there's the emotional relearning that we were just talking about. Now, part of becoming more mature, is to be able to know the truth. And one way that we can do that is by affirming the truth in us. Here again, it goes along the same line. If we say it, do we really believe it? Are we affirming it? And I have a whole bunch of them there. I have safety and security with those that I trust and love. I know that love for me is constant, unconditional, will be there no matter what. I have the capacity to return to a peace and joy from painful emotions. Now, just saying these isn't like rubbing a magic lamp. It's not just going to happen. But saying them and then checking the disbelief about it gives you then what? A reason to investigate. A reason to get maybe counseling, a reason to pray about it, a reason to start thinking and doing some of the things we talked just a few minutes ago that can help you, right? Some of the different reframing, because these are things that are really true about yourself. And if we're going to be mature, these are things that we need to start to believe. And if it doesn't happen the first time, that's where we can be reparented. And we can start to really mature and be more reparenting with ourselves. We talked about God reparenting us, and that's certainly one way to be reparented. There's things that we can do too. Soul yearnings to know that we matter and belong, to know that we're lovable and that we have worth, to be safe and comforted, to be significant and have honor, to have a purpose. There's things we can do to reparent ourselves where those things become true in for ourselves. You see, an immature child feels unlovable, believes that there's no way out. They take the stance that no one can tell them perhaps what to do. They don't know what to do or who they are. But yet a mature adult believes that they are loved and lovable. They feel safe. They have a sense of who they are. They have a good character. They take responsibility. And so we want to strive toward that, and we can do that through reparenting. It's a do-over card. And there's 3 sources, right? Other people can help us reparent as we have relationships with others and they're happy to be with us. There's the inner dialogue where we can be compassionate to ourselves, where we can have positive self-talk, where we can really comfort that inner child and ask it to mature with us. And then there's God, and we spent a lot of time talking about how God wants to reparent us. And so there are things that we can do. And in the end of the lesson, I talked about some of the things that you can do. There's self-governing, and there's self-care, and there's self-love. And that self-governing means owning our faults, right? It means creating new habits, setting boundaries. We have to take responsibility. And this isn't easy. It isn't easy if we've been in a position where that wasn't true in our lives. There's something stopping us, and good counseling may help you. Continuing in this course will help you. Getting the help you need and start self-governing will be really something that will help you. Look at those blind spots. Get others to point out things to you. Get evaluations that will help you learn about yourself. Take care of some of the fears that you're experiencing. And then there's the self-care. And I've given a list of things, physically. We try to emotionally be more mature, and yet we're not sleeping. We're not exercising, we're not eating right. All those physical things contribute to our mental outlook. It's important that we do that. And emotionally, we're not taking care of ourselves. And we're not doing the right things. We're not eating the right things. Maybe we're caught in addictions, right? And those things don't help us. Financially, we may be in a world of hurt and we're not doing the things we should do there. And that's going to cause all kinds of stress. And socially, we don't have a support team. We're not in any groups. We're isolating. And then spiritually, We're not spending time in prayer or reading the scriptures or talking to God about these things. All those kind of things are part of that self-care that we need to take responsibility for. And then that's self-love. We need to be patient with ourselves. We need to empathize with ourselves. We need to validate our emotions. We need to, really love ourselves. And how do we do that? We do that like you would someone that you love. How would you treat a young child? How would you treat someone that comes to you with those kind of difficulties? You would be loving and have empathy and care. We need to do that to that immature part of ourselves. We need to love ourselves. We need to stop blaming ourselves and chiding ourselves. And we need to have the compassion toward ourselves. And we'll be talking more and more about that. We need to remember we're human, and humans aren't perfect. We need to think through what we can do better and work on ourselves. All these things is part of what we can do to mature. We'll continue this as we go through the program, so I look forward to working more with you on these issues. But please, take this lesson, go through it, talk to God about it, ask yourself, what do I need to do? This is a pivotal part of the program now, where we start to take responsibility and we start to have the hope that yes, things can be different. It can start today. Thanks for joining us today on this Emotional Resilience Living with the Fruit of the Spirit class. Please share this video with others. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of the other exciting classes. You can also, for books and videos and podcasts, you can go to our website, ronovet.com, and find out more information.